Hi guys, my name's Jordan, and in this video, it's another entry in my ant room tour series, where we take a look at the inner workings of my numerous collection of ant colonies. In this episode, we're looking at one of the most ubiquitous types of ants on the planet. Pretty much no matter where you're from, you've probably encountered some of these guys before. They are the ants of the genus Camponotus, commonly known as sugar ants. Stay tuned to the end as I'm going to be doing a special giveaway in celebration of this channel just reaching 100,000 subscribers. Alright, first up, we have a fairly common species here in eastern Australia. Camponotus aeneopilosus, commonly known as golden-tailed sugar ants, after the fine golden hairs which cover their abdomens. Originally, I started these guys out in a founding-sized acrylic nest, which they quickly outgrew. Now they're living in this small-sized white tongue nest and are doing really well, showing very little signs of slowing down their growth. Currently the population is around 100 workers, so not a massive colony, but that's still quite a significant number, considering sugar ant colonies tend to take much longer to develop than other ants, mainly due to their larger than average body size. Generally speaking, the larger the species of ant, the longer time it'll take for the colony to mature. Before introducing the colony into their current home, as an experiment, I decided to add in a thin layer of sand, covering the entire floor space. A substrate layer like this isn't essential for sugar ants, but I felt it may give them a more natural feeling surface to rest their sensitive brood upon, and it'll also slightly help retain more humidity within the nest over time. I found this colony is quite sensitive to light, so I usually keep this red shield on top to keep them relaxed. Whilst this transparent piece of acrylic does let light in, and you can still clearly see the ants inside, the ants on the other hand don't perceive the light. Ants, among many other insects, can't see light waves within the red spectrum, so to these guys, it'd seem pretty much pitch black under there. This colony is also one of the most active sugar ants I've kept. I think part of the reason I always see them so busy is the fact that this is a diurnal species of sugar ant, meaning they naturally do most of their foraging throughout the daylight hours, which is usually the time I check up on them. Being diurnal is kind of unusual for sugar ants, as most of the others are strictly nocturnal. Here you can see the queen ant, mother to the entire colony. She stands out quite clearly from the rest with her increased size, and she also has far less golden hairs covering her abdomen. I find it quite hard to get a clear shot of her, as the workers dutifully cluster around her and climb up against the edges of the nest, creating a wall of ants and shading her from the light. A good strategy for protecting her from being spotted by a potential predator. While they were at it, some of the workers began further assisting their queen by keeping her clean. They do so by grooming her with their mouthparts. Their oily saliva contains antimicrobial properties. Watch here as she rolls over to be groomed, kind of like a dog hoping for a belly rub. Looks like she's enjoying that. Almost all animals spend much of their time cleaning themselves, but ants are one of the most hygienic. Living in such large numbers, within confined and humid environments, for them, cleanliness is vitally important. If neglected, their entire colony could easily be overwhelmed by harmful bacterial and fungal outbreaks. So ants impulsively clean themselves and their fellow colony members as thoroughly as they can. Something us humans could learn a thing or two about right now. Just don't go out licking each other though. Soap and water suits us better. The ants' brood receive the same treatment too. The workers are constantly seen cleaning them with their mouthparts. This habit not only helps scrape off and destroy fungal spores, but also serves another important purpose. Once covered in the ants' saliva, the brood then sticks nicely together, allowing the ants to cluster their brood up into little clumps. This helps the brood retain their precious moisture, and additionally makes the ants' job of relocating the brood much easier. Instead of picking up and moving several eggs individually, they simply just pick up a pile at a time. Very useful if their nests were to be disturbed by a predator. The ants can very quickly retreat their brood out of harm's way. For these guys, this will also come in handy when it comes time to move to a new nest, which they'll probably be in need of fairly soon. It's getting pretty packed in there now. Next up, we have another very common species here in Australia, Camponotus consobrinus, also known as banded sugar ants, after the yellowish-orange stripe they have wrapping around the base of their abdomens. This colony is quite special to me, as it's the first ever sugar ant colony I've raised. Almost 3 years ago now, I was walking through my local park, and I was lucky enough to spot this queen. She had just performed her nuptial flight and had shed her wings. I captured her up and moved her into a makeshift colostral cell, comprised of a water-filled test tube and plugged off with cotton. A few months later, the first workers arrived, and her colony was underway. As they grew, I introduced them to new nesting areas, starting them out in a tubs and tube setup, and gradually adding in additional test tubes as they needed them. Not long after, I decided to create a single nesting space, which would comfortably house the entire colony, rather than having them scattered across multiple test tubes. So I got to work on a concrete nest build, which you might remember from my How to Build an Ant Farm tutorial. It's been really great to see just how many of you guys followed along with that video over the years. So please keep sending in your designs by tagging me at Ants Australia on Instagram. I've been really enjoying seeing what you guys come up with. So after my build was done, I hooked it up, gave it some water, and the ants moved in almost immediately. The colony now had a fresh new home, and I now had a nice clear view of the ants within. Fast forward several months later, and the colony had doubled in size. All seemed like it was going well. The queen looked healthy, and there was plenty of brood developing away. But when I took a closer look, I noticed a serious problem. At first, I thought the glass lid was just becoming a little grubby, which inevitably happens over time. But then I saw that underneath the cloudy lid, parts of the nest floor had begun to darken into little green splotchy patterns. Mold was starting to take hold. As a result of the outbreak, quite a few of the next generation of workers sadly didn't develop properly, emerging deformed and frail. Over the many years I've been keeping ants now, I've found mold and other fungal outbreaks to be one of the most common causes of colonies collapsing. Usually the threat can be prevented by housing the ants in a relatively small nest, which allows the colony to all fit in comfortably, but at the same time won't allow for too much unoccupied space. Empty space within the nest often gets utilised by the ants as garbage sites, where they'll defecate, place their dead, empty cocoons and food scraps. Given the humid conditions within the ants' nests, this waste serves as the perfect fuel for fungal growth. So it's really important to carefully match the size of the colony with the size of the nest, to ensure that the ants create garbage zones well away from the nest, ideally within their foraging area. Admittedly, the nest that I built for this colony was originally a little too large for them, and they actually did end up creating a small garbage site within the nest at one point, which they later removed on their own. And several months on, still living in the same nest, they were well overdue to be introduced to a new one. So for the colony's next home, I thought I'd try an acrylic nest. Here I've hooked it up using a T-connector. And I tried encouraging the colony to move by exposing their old nest to light and covering up their new one with another red shield to keep it nice and dark. And I also attached up a water plug test tube to the spare entrance port to both provide the nest with humidity and to also offer the ants a convenient source of drinking water whenever they needed it. It didn't take long for the ants to take an interest in the new nest. But not all of the colony was so convinced, with roughly half remaining behind, the all-important queen included. After living in this nest for so long, it seems these guys have grown quite attached to it. After a couple of days of waiting, with the colony still divided, I thought they might need some extra incentive. So I decided to warm the new nest up a little by running a heating cable underneath. Ants, being cold-blooded animals, they're greatly attracted to warmth. Raising their body temperatures makes themselves much more productive and greatly accelerates the development of their growing young. But at the same time, too much heat can be a deterrent for the ants and potentially be fatal. So you can see here that I'm only heating the bottom half of the nest. This way, the colony has a temperature gradient to work with and can decide upon the most safe and comfortable spot to place themselves and their brood. Within just an hour, the reluctant half of the colony finally decided it was time to move. Now I just needed to remove their old nest and hook them back up to their foraging area. A successful move. So despite how extremely clean these little animals are, fungal outbreaks still pose a significant, ever-present threat. It's a good thing that I discovered the signs of growth early. If left alone much longer, it likely would have expanded wider throughout the nest, potentially claiming the lives of many more ants than it did. Let's hope the colony has better luck in this new nest. Next up, it's a colony of Camponotus lownei. Over the years, they've been cycled through multiple nests and have been steadily growing in size. They're a much smaller species than the others, and so have grown relatively quickly by comparison. They always seem to have a healthy batch of brood developing away. Here's one of their larvae beginning to spin its cocoon. See its little mouth parts there? The larva is releasing thin strands of silk from a tiny gland just underneath its mouth. It then meticulously moves its head back and forth until it eventually covers its entire body. This silken shell will help protect the larva whilst it makes the delicate transformation into a pupa. A few weeks later, it will then emerge from its silken sleeping bag, looking very different from when it entered. They're now an adult ant. Their exoskeletons are still pale and soft, making them quite vulnerable to predation, and they aren't very sure-footed at best. But once they figure out how to walk and their exoskeletons harden up, they'll begin to work, usually starting out by performing simple nesting duties, like caring for the brood and their queen. But this young ant here was having some real troubles. If you look closely at the ends of her legs, you can see a thin string-like substance wrapping them together. Unfortunately, when ants emerge from their cocoons, they can sometimes accidentally ensnare themselves within their silken strands. The silk is exceptionally strong. Some passing workers recognize the ant's predicament and attempt to untangle her. But their attempts are fruitless. Escape is near impossible. Sadly, this ant will likely never get to take her first steps. On a lighter note, there is one ant in this colony who's managed to struggle through a similar adversity, and it's very important that she has. It's the queen ant. When I found this queen during nuptial flights a few years back, she was in a pretty bad way. She was missing a couple of legs, and of the 4 that she had left, 2 of them were disfigured, probably the result of running into a rival ant colony. After capturing her up and housing her in a test tube setup, I had little hopes that she'd make it. But somehow, she managed to not only survive the ordeal, but has gone on to raise a very sizable colony. Rarely does she move around anymore, and luckily for her, she doesn't need to. She's very well looked after, her every need being graciously tended to by her children. You may have noticed throughout this video so far that some of the colony members look quite different from each other. Sugar ant workers are polymorphic, meaning the ants will vary in size and shape. The largest are the soldiers. This caste of ant has a much larger head than the others. These abnormally large heads are full of muscle, perfect for dismembering large prey and defending their colony from predators. Then there's the minor workers. Their role is usually to tend to the growing young, and eventually to begin foraging later in life. You also may have noticed that some of the ants have huge abdomens, especially the soldier ants, some of which match even their queen in size. Within their social stomachs, they store surplus amounts of liquid food and water, which they steadily share with their fellow colony members whenever they're in need. They do so by regurgitating it and transferring it in a sort of kissing action, in a process known as trophallaxis. So the repletes are like these little living portable fridges, a perfect way of preserving any resources the colony collects. It's the same strategy that spider ants take, which I featured in the last video in this series. Although, comparatively, storage capacity is a little less extreme with these guys. Next up, it's another small species, and a very small colony too. These guys are Camponotus innexus, and they're currently the youngest sugar ant colony I'm keeping, with just 6 workers present, with the 6th only just arriving the other day, evident by her noticeably pale, yellowish-orange colour when compared to the others. These ants are a rather mysterious species to me. Whenever I've encountered them in the wild, I've found them to be incredibly skittish. If I so much as breathe in their general direction, they disappear into the undergrowth in an instant. Similarly, I'm finding this colony quite difficult to observe and film as well. They completely freak out when exposed to light. And once they finally settle down, they tend to cluster up into the darkest corner of the nest, making it quite hard to get a clear view of them. Typically, younger ant colonies are much more sensitive to light and small vibrations, but as they mature and their population rises, they tend to grow in confidence too, feeling much less threatened by these slight disruptions, which is pretty noticeable with the banded sugar ant colony. These guys hardly react at all when disturbed. They seemingly couldn't care less. So it'll be interesting to see how this colony progresses, and if they'll better adapt to my presence and being observed over time. For their future nest, I've been thinking about building it from wood, as I've often seen wild colonies of this species nesting in and around rotting logs, so this might make them feel a little more comfortable. Also, I was somewhat inspired by the idea by watching Ants Scandinavia's video, where he did an in-depth tutorial on wooden nest builds. Link to that video in the description below. Next colony is another golden-tailed species, Camponotus suffusus, and in my opinion, the prettiest of the bunch. They have those similar shiny golden abdomens of aeneopilosus, but instead have slightly more colourful bodies. They're also quite unusual when compared to the other colonies, in that once the ants reach full maturity, their colour will vary slightly from ant to ant. Some have bright orangish heads, whilst others look almost jet black. I think this colour variation, paired with the sugar ants' diverse size variation between the different castes, gives this colony lots of character, as many of the ants have their own unique appearance. And the colony's visual diversity will only increase once the soldiers begin emerging as well, which the colony hasn't seen just yet. The queen of this colony is quite distinctive looking too, with this faint red cross shape running across her thorax. And much like the other golden-tailed sugar ant queen, she lacks most of those prominent golden hairs on her abdomen. This one has been quite productive too, producing plenty of young. Within under 6 months, the colony outgrew their founding nest, and so it was then time for a move. For the last move, you'll remember I used a heat gradient to entice the ants in. But for these guys, I thought I would instead create a moisture gradient. For this method, I simply injected some fresh water into the right edge of the new nest, which can pass in through the tiny gap between the acrylic lid and the chamber wall. The concrete then quickly soaks the moisture up like a sponge and eventually settles down into the base of the nest. With the right side now damp and the left side dry, the ants then had the freedom to choose their ideal spot. Additionally, I exposed them to light whilst covering up their new nest. Then it was just a matter of waiting. The next day, the whole colony had moved, and it's pretty obvious which side they preferred. The dampened side. Pretty much the entire colony had bunched themselves up against it. This moving method is not only effective, but also gives myself, as the ant's keeper, a better idea as to how much moisture and humidity this particular colony prefers. Valuable information for the future well-being of the ants. Alright, now on to the final colony, Camponotus nigriceps, commonly known as black-headed sugar ants. These orange and black ants look very similar to the banded sugar ants I showed you guys earlier, but they can be distinguished by their lack of an orange band around their abdomens. Instead, they're completely black, end to end. They're also slightly larger in size, and currently the largest species of all the sugar ants in my collection. The colony is still in its infancy though, and generally the first few generations of ants within a colony are going to be relatively small. So far, the ants are averaging around 12 millimeters in length, but mature colonies of this species are known to produce soldier casts double that size, which is quite comparable to some of the larger bull ant species we have here in Australia. So they can be pretty big ants to say the least. Although it might take at least a few more generations before ants of that size begin to emerge within this colony. Here's the very first, who only just emerged from her cocoon, still yet learning how to move around. Once this soldier matures and her exoskeleton darkens, she'll look much like her mother, with her wide jet black head and large body. It's quite common for people to confuse these soldiers as queens. An easy way to tell the two apart is to look for scars on either side of the ant's thorax. Only the reproductive queens will have these. These markings are where the queen's wings were pulled off from after she performed her nuptial flight. And if you look closely at their heads, you'll also notice the queens will have a small cluster of dots on their foreheads, known as ocelli. These are tiny eyes. Very little is known of their purpose, but it's speculated they may help the queens orientate themselves whilst they're up in the air during nuptial flights. So that's my collection of Australian sugar ants. These guys are definitely one of my favourite types of ants to keep. Their larger than average size makes it so it's very easy to see everything they're up to, just with your naked eye. Plus, the way that they stockpile and preserve their food within their social stomachs and avidly share it throughout the rest of their colony means they generally don't need to be fed as regularly as the more primitive, less social ant species. And in my experience, they're not too fussy with food either, taking well to sugar water, fresh fruits, and most insects. They're also very hardy ants, responding well to drastic changes in temperature. Some species can thrive in even the harshest of climates, like this Canadian Carpenter Ant species. Every winter, they endure freezing weather, going into a period of dormancy for several months, before emerging and flourishing in the summertime. And, as I said earlier, sugar ants can be found pretty much everywhere. So, with a little bit of luck and know-how, just about anyone can find themselves a queen, and begin raising their own colony. So if you're looking to getting into ant keeping, sugar ants are definitely a very beginner-friendly choice. Alright, now onto the special 100k giveaway. But first to announce the winner from last video, where I covered Australia's tropical weaver ants. The question was, what do you find most interesting about them? And the winner is Ant Knowledge, whose favourite thing is how they use their own bodies to make bridges. And also how, unlike many other ant species, weaver ants produce more major worker castes than minor castes. Congratulations, Ant Knowledge, you've just won yourself one of our Waitong starter kits. So as a way of thanking you guys for reaching this crazy milestone, I'm going to be giving away 3 AusAnts founding nests to 3 lucky winners, in whichever colour you prefer most. The nests will also come along with a bunch of accessories, as seen here. Plus, the winners will also each receive one of my new t-shirt designs, made from 100% organic cotton, which are now available from my new store. I'm also selling prints from my photography work, and some other cool stuff. So if you like what you see here, and want to help support myself and this YouTube channel, I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, to enter the giveaway, simply answer the following. Which is your favourite species of sugar ant, and why? It could be one of the species I've featured here in this video, or it could be one that you've discovered on your own, perhaps native to your local area. Post your answers in the comment section below. I'll pick out 3 different comments and announce them as the winners in my next video. I'll also be running a bonus giveaway on my Instagram and Facebook page too. Most recently, we hosted a little colour in contest. The idea was to give you guys something to do, given so many of us have been stuck at home during these strange times. So I traced out some ants, and you guys coloured them in, and I was really impressed. It was great seeing just how artistic you guys all are. So for more chances to win some ant farms and other prizes, go and follow me over there. All the links are in the description below. A huge thanks to my Patreon supporters for helping make videos like this one possible. Especially my top tier supporters, John Overton, Nicholas Atkins, Andy Kerr, Thomas Wyndham, Robert C., Irene Watkins, and Daniel Mifsud. As always, thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed.